This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, we are talking fashion and function, or how the story of clothes affects our lives. So, this is number 2 in a series we are doing on fashion this summer. So everybody knows that every year I do a special series of special episodes on a specific topic. And this year, we're doing something very different because rather than doing a bunch of topics, I'm doing all of them on one topic on fashion. And I'm really happy to have my friend Brady with me. And episode number 1, we did fabric and weaving. So if you want to go listen to the history of fabric and weaving mixed in with a little bit of capitalism and feminism, then definitely go back and listen to season 3, episode 1. And this time we're going to talk about how fashion affects your lives. Yes, even you. Yes, you, the listener, the watcher who's observing right now. Fashion affects your life in more ways than you think. So, Brady, what are your early thoughts on fashion and how clothes affect our lives?
Well, I mean, I think I've already told you this multiple times, but I do think that fashion is one of the most intimate forms of self-expression that anyone can have, because everybody's got to wear clothes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not everybody has to, but I mean, most of society wears clothes, and the clothes that you choose to dress yourself in, even if you think are just an arbitrary choice that it doesn't really matter. I just wear whatever bummy things I want to wear. That's still a way that you're expressing yourself to the world. That's still something that you picked out that you wanted to put on your body. And it is still also one of those things that walking down a street, you can have an amazing Porsche and a giant, huge house and all these fancy things. And if you walk down the street with ripped up clothing, people aren't going to assume that of you, you
Yeah.
know? So it is, it's the first thing people notice. It's the first thing people click onto, and it's your first impression
Oh
to
yeah.
anyone.
That's especially true among like working class coded people who aren't working class, and people get very weirded out. Like my mom dresses like a butch lesbian. Okay, she wears jeans and collared shirts, lovingly held together by Brady currently because she can't find any. So she has resorted to having Brady fix them up for her. But the thing is, like, it's like growing up, like my mom would be kind of like, oh yes, I like my mother's fashion style. Here's how she telegraphs. My mother wears rings from knuckle to tip of her finger on all 4 fingers and both thumbs. So when you shake my mother's hand, it's like shaking hands with a metal gauntlet. It's like with a knight. It's very heavy. and um
That's
and
exactly
so
right.
Yes. And so she'll go and buy jewelry, and people don't, and I've seen this happen in department stores. Like all the young sales clerks look at her and they're kind of like, oh, she's not going to buy anything. And then an older sales clerk will come along and I'll be kind of like, she'll then spend $1,000 on jewelry because that's what she does, sort of thing. And so the sales lady is really glad because she's got the commission, and all the young girls have gotten cut out because she's not telegraphing what type of customer she is very well.
She's not telegraphing that she's a high-end customer that will spend money.
Right.
She's telegraphing the butch lesbian that has to get her shirts fixed because she doesn't want to spend money on new shirts. But that's
Yes.
not the reason. That's just because she hasn't found the shirt she wants.
Yes, exactly. And so that, so but regardless of it's still, whatever it is, you're still sending a message, even if that isn't accurate. Um, like that, you're still sending some type of message. And you sometimes see, and you also see the reverse of this. Like you'll see people like, my favorite is when you see people like rest her soul, Gloria Vanderbilt, would wear the most simple things, but you could tell by the fabric and the tailoring and the styling, it was very expensive. It was very expensive in that very simplistic sort of way. I remember she was on TV with her son Anderson Cooper, and they were promoting their book, and she showed up in a pair of black slacks and a white collared t-shirt. Very simple, but if you observed it, you could tell it was incredibly expensive
Mm,
because the
yep.
way it was cut, the quality of the fabric, the way it laid, it was it was deceptively simple. But if you knew what to look for, you could tell that it was, quite expensive. And
Mhm.
even that, even on that kind of end of, very famous aristocratic generational wealth, even that sort of sends a message of I practice this in my own style. I talk about it as it's a matter of quiet elegance.
Mhm.
True elegance is understated. It's not shout out loud. It's a very sort of, it's if you know, you know. And if you don't,
Mhm.
it's not of your concern, sort of thing.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and
Well, and I'd like that
yeah,
with my style, I do the very vintage and the very, um, always dresses, always that, and that started from years ago, my ex telling me that, if you're doing all this business stuff, like, you are your business card. Like, the way you dress, the way you look makes people trust you with their clothes. And so that's part of the reason why also dresses are just more comfortable, but that's just me.
yes. No, no, absolutely no. But that is when it comes to, but that's also you're using yourself as a way to send a message to put your clients at ease. It's like if
Mhm.
this person, the other one you told me that I thought was very interesting was people trusted you more with colored hair. If you're listening on the podcast, not watching on YouTube, Brady and she got her hair did yesterday, and so for this, and so it's new and it's lovely and it's a lovely shade of aquamarine, and
I've done every color in the rainbow at this point, I'm pretty sure. But
yes.
yeah, because when I first started doing bridal alterations and was like, I need to be professional, I'm going to look professional, and so I'm gonna dress professionally, and I'm gonna get all the dye out of my hair so I don't look like, edgy or anything like that, and go all natural. And I got more at that point, I was getting more by the time I got my hair all natural. That was when people started questioning whether or not I knew what I was doing. And then as soon
Yeah.
as I went back to colored, weird, funky hair, then all of a sudden everybody trusted me because I look artistic. So obviously I know what I'm
Yeah, no,
doing.
it's so weird. It's so weird. So I want to read something that will get further our discussion. So this series is also the basis for a really great article and video we're doing with planksip.org. And that's going to be called Iconic Fashion. That's not going to come out to October. You'll have long heard this by the time that comes out, but CameronJournal.com, keep an eye out. I'll let everybody know. When that comes out. And so I finished kind of writing the piece for us. And so I'm going to read that a little, not the whole thing, a little bit of it quickly because it applies to exactly what we're talking about. So it starts like this. Major events in world history have influenced clothing. When there was a mini ice age in the 14th century, Europeans had to wear layers of clothes. This is best demonstrated by the color but heavy Delft style Dutch clothing from the period. Women wore 4 layers of skirts, furs, and linen stomachers with 4 layers on top as well to keep themselves warm in their drafty houses along the trading canals of the city. Another example, more modern, is how World War I created clothes that women could dress themselves. This fundamental shift in clothing was led primarily by Coco Chanel, who with many others had fled Paris to escape German bombs, and when wealthy women on the French Riviera were looking for new clothes, They needed clothing they could put on without the help of their maid. Modern ready-to-wear was born. Buttons moved to the front, and a new way of wearing clothes took the fashion world by storm. Back here in America, we have our fashion-changing events like the Great Depression, which killed the flapper dress of the 1920s. The waistline returned, sleeves were popular again, and necklines rose. It is of note that when things go wrong in this country, our style tends to become more conservative. This happened again around the 2008 financial crisis as well. In the styles of the early aughts, women especially were wearing lots of lace, exposed midriffs, and low hip-hugging jeans. In the wake of the financial crisis, style moved away from this to simpler styles and high waists on denim. Most recently, the pandemic introduced masks and casual clothing as an outgrowth of athleisure. Brady would mention here that she has observed that her brides, when they come to get their dresses fitted, are all wearing sports bras. The age of the cute but always uncomfortable bra was killed by COVID-19.
100%. Nobody knows what size bra we wear anymore. We just don't. That's not a thing we do anymore.
Yeah. No more 30, 40, double. No. You just get your t-shirt size and go from there.
Yeah. Small, medium, large. That's all we're doing at this point. It's all stretchy. It's fine.
Yes, exactly. Which, referencing season 1, if you love a good sports bra, then hug your local synthetic fabric. That was made popular by synthetic fibers.
That is how we got that.
And if you want to learn more about that, go back and listen to episode 1. We'll be here when you get back. And so that is, I mean, it is all in no matter what's happening in the world, our clothing style and fashion changes immediately. Sometimes unconsciously. Yeah. Also, I mean,
historically, a lot of times it's changed almost unconsciously because a lot of it came from what was available, what we could have.
Yes,
but even
what
in
was
more
possible.
modern times, yeah, it definitely still changes for every dip and weave of society, and it changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting, in our modern period, even in like, my adulthood, which is 2006 to the present day. I mean, how much less formal society has gotten,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember
just in that amount of time.
Yeah, I remember I was working at this one job that actually required us to like dress nice, like jeans on Friday were like, ooh, we're being risky here.
Yeah.
And I remember we were all sitting outside being like, how did we find the only job in Seattle, ever casual West Coast, that requires us to actually we found the only job in town that wants slacks and collared shirts. How is that even possible?
Right.
And even like airport style is now pajamas, which is just horrific.
I got denied from going on an airport one time because my shorts were too short when I was 15.
Yeah.
And now you don't really have to even be wearing full clothing anymore to go because you're supposed to dress up to look professional to go on airplanes.
Yeah, no, and that's, I mean, you look at the old tapes and it's like, there are, women in formal suits and men in suit and tie getting up to fly.
With the hat.
Yes, and matching luggage. It's such, to our modern, it's such an anachronism. It's completely devoid of how we do things now.
Yeah, it's totally different.
Yes.
It's changed a lot. Well, and just from both of us, our upbringing of even the difference between when I was little, and I'm assuming when you were little, girls going to church were expected to always wear a dress.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No.
Wore hosiery, and I wore tights, and I had little tiny shoes and all these things because you had to dress up for church every Sunday. You weren't just showing up in your jeans and t-shirt. That's not a thing you can do.
Nope. No, the first jacket I ever bought was for church. And especially that was doubly true for me and my mom because we both were in choir and orchestra, on not that we called it that, but worship team, if you know, you know. And like because we were like in front of people, like the standard was even higher. Like we really absolutely
Oh yeah.
110% had to look just so. Um
Mhm. I also
and
got kicked off of a worship team one time for wearing culottes because you could see my knees.
yes. Oh yeah, no, I mean, growing up like growing up evangelical when it comes to fashion, that's its own
That's its
little kind
own
of
crazy.
like yeah, kind of little own crazy thing. It was like when I went to college in Florida, we had to have collared shirts and ties in the morning, polo shirts in the afternoon, and shorts unless you were going to the swimming pool were strictly verboten. You know,
Mhm.
and anytime you were going to church, you had to wear a suit. So literally on Wednesday night to go to Wednesday night service, I'd walk from the music building all the way back to my dorm, change clothes to walk all the way back to church. You also couldn't enter the dining hall as a man without a jacket. So on Monday nights, my studio time for music ended a half hour before the dining hall closed, so I could never get dinner. So Monday nights I always ate out. I would just walk from the studio straight to my car and I would go grab some fast food because there was no time to go get food. That was not a
Yeah,
thing. So, because
yeah.
there was no way I was getting all the way back across campus and get just and then get to the dining hall. I would have gotten there. I would have never made it on time. I would have been there 2 minutes before they closed. So I just ate myself and yeah, and went from there. So lots of clothes, so many clothes.
So many clothes, so
But
many
again,
changes
this
for
is how fashion affects your life. Your parents join a religion, and all of a sudden you need a lot more clothes
right? All of a sudden, you have to put on way more clothing.
than we originally planned. So I wanted to kind of roll it back to antiquity real fast because this is supposed to be fashion as function through the years, and we haven't gone through many years so far. So
No.
I wanted to dash back to antiquity and talk about a couple things like the Greek chiton, the Roman toga, and in ancient China, fashion affected your life because the length of your robe was an expression of your social rank. The emperor obviously had the longest robe, and if you were a peasant, you had no robe at all. But everybody else was, it just kind of kept raising the lower down the rung of things that you were. But it was a universal signal. People could read and understand where you stood without having to ask or say. And there were sumptuary laws. So if you were wearing clothing of the wrong social rank, that was an arrestable offense.
Yeah. There's been a lot of fashion things that have been arrestable offenses over the years.
Yeah, I mean, people kind of forget, like, there's not, I mean, there were, for example, there in the 19th century, there was speaking of sumptuary laws and how it affects your life, women could be arrested for wearing too many pieces of men's clothing.
Mm,
It had to be two
yeah,
or
that makes sense.
fewer. Yeah, it had to be two or fewer. So they were actually, especially like our precursors to lesbians and queer people and non-binary folk and all this type of thing. And you could get actually, and men as well. If men were wearing women's clothing, you also could get arrested for that. And so so that was kind of this big divide. So literally, it's like you could be arrested and jailed for wearing the wrong clothes up
Hmm.
literally up until like the 1950s. Even in the 50s, you could be arrested for wearing something that was too revealing, was too lewd, publicly indecent. You know,
Wearing a
yes.
two-piece as a woman.
Yes, no,
You know.
in you could be
Mhm.
arrested in France and Italy for wearing a bikini till 1977.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we could go into swimwear is a whole crazy topic about that.
Oh yeah. Oh no, but that's the thing is like these like fashion is not just the stuff you put on to not be naked in public because we've said that's illegal. Like no, like this is it is incredibly vital. Like it was so important in the past. We used to arrest people for wearing the wrong clothes,
Yeah. And
or
it is
not being covered
integral to
up
our
enough.
society. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's why I said like with ancient China, with the social ranking being based on your, on your clothes. Even in ancient Rome or Greece with the chiton, if your toga was highly decorated or was dyed a certain color, that was an indication of wealth, rank, and privilege. Especially in the
Mhm.
Roman household system, because in the Roman household system, you had the slaves, you had the free persons, and then you had citizens, and you would usually have a patron patriarch. That's where we get our word patriarchy from, patris, meaning father. I took 5 years of Latin in high school. Can you tell? That's and so you had all these different sorts. So in fact, in ancient Rome, if you were not a citizen, you could not wear a toga. You usually wore a woven shirt. um and so if and then within that, the Roman house system, there was also classes within that. You had the knights, who were usually heads of the military. You had other kind of landed aristocracy. You had administrators, and then you had nobility. And within that class system, how much your toga was decorated, what color it was, all this type of thing, was indication of rank and wealth as well. So if you were a patrician Roman and had recently come into some new land or some money, or you were a poor soldier who had been given land as part of working a Roman campaign, the first thing you did, and this brings the conversation full circle, the first thing you did was buy new clothes.
New clothes. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
because that was the first symbol that your position in society had changed.
Hmm.
You know,
Which I mean, we do still, in somewhat similarly, do that with uniforms for military, uniforms for certain jobs, that kind of stuff
right?
to indicate, but we just don't do it outside of the work environment always.
Right, but also, I mean, yes, especially now. But I mean, also consider like, um, with, like airlines, what made airlines so iconic? It was the fashion of the flight attendants.
Yep.
And that's even true today.
Yep.
Like the big state airlines for Etihad or Qatar Airways or Emirates, their flight attendants are gorgeously dressed. Now, those are Muslim countries, so they're also very conservatively dressed. They still wear hosiery. They're keeping the
Yes.
hosiery industry in business. And they very conservative. Um, and that is a potent they're really the face of the airline. They're the
Yeah.
first
That's the
uniformed
look.
employee you're going to, yeah. So and
Hmm.
that comes from, when you walk up to a gate agent or when you board the plane or whatever have you. Nobody, I mean, I probably wouldn't want to fly on a commercial airliner where the pilot shows up in jeans and a t-shirt. I don't know about you, but like I know a guy, my buddy
Well,
Ron
and because
Cluxton is a pilot for United, and I love him dearly. But when he goes to fly the plane, I want him to look like a pilot, like look
right.
piloty
Well, and
while
that's
you
part of the
pilot the
thing, and that
plane.
was one of the things they used as a marketing ploy to help make people feel more safe about, getting in a tin can that was going above the earth, is they marketed it as this glamorous thing because you have all these glamorous people that look professional and know what they're doing and always are poised and always say the right thing. And that was a big marketing part of it, was literally the attire.
Yes, and that was something that, I mean, even to this day, like like especially like the old legacy airlines that were so known for that, the Pan Am, TWA, all this type of thing, in marketing material, wherever, it was always the flight attendants and their uniforms that were always like the thing you remembered, because that was the first thing you interacted with, you know
Yeah. Yeah.
um and it's a huge, trust brand building sort of thing. And even now, airline uniforms have gotten a lot more simple and are obviously for both genders now, not just women, and all this sort of thing. But even now, airlines changing the look of cabin crew is still a major event. Like they've
Yes.
gotten all the crazy.
And
They
they,
hire designers. There's a committee. It's a
mhm,
whole thing.
it's a whole thing. And they
Yeah.
still require, like, no, we don't have like, some of you can wear t-shirts and some of you can wear long sleeve shirts. No, if this is a t-shirt day, we all do t-shirts today. Like, this is,
Yes.
everybody still has to be very, very, very uniformed, all
Yes.
perfectly put together. Not just
Yes.
here, you got a shirt and just wear some random black slacks. That's
Yeah.
not how that works.
Yeah, but that's I mean again something that it's like when you're in a mall or other situation and you're looking for someone that looks like security, you want someone to look like they are a security dude with the whole thing and the
Mm-hmm.
whole accoutrement, all this type of thing. Um, that's a very important aspect of that, and that we're whether we realize it or not, we have been unconsciously trained, and we do this from very young, unconsciously train people to look for certain things, an official uniformed person, they're going to know something that can help you sort of thing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's
I
police,
mean,
that's fire, that's throughout society.
when my son was little, I always used to teach him is if you ever got lost, you go find a police officer or a firefighter because you know what they look like, or a mom with kids. And because those are all easily recognizable uniforms, basically.
Right.
Even the mom with kids, it's pretty recognizable. She's got kids.
Yes, exactly. No, I mean yes. So we that is, so in that way, it it can be a safety thing as well. If you're in a distressful situation, the first thing you look for, and ironically, is you look for someone who's wearing the right clothes that says "I can
Yep.
help." Like this, so
Uh-huh.
yes, and this is all. So it's very easy, I think, now given the marketing hype around fashion and how esoteric some of the couture designs get. Because I think the biggest criticism against fashion, because the major designers will put out stuff that looks really nuts, and people will be kind of like, "Oh my god, what are they doing?" And so it kind of makes fashion seem incredibly trite. But the
Yes.
reality is that it has an outsized effect on everything we do, things that we look for, and in some cases can even save your life if you can flag down the right person in time.
Well, and I would agree with
Doesn't
you is
seem
that I
so
think
trite now does it?
exactly. I think so many people, when you think fashion, they think runway fashion. And fashion is anything you put on your body that represents you. It is clothing. It's just clothing. So, yes, runway fashion can be very obtuse, but that doesn't mean that's all fashion. Fashion is every part of life.
Yeah, it's it's even sometimes an expression of national sentiment. The most recent one was the Miss Universe pageant, and some of the very odd things those women wear to represent their country. And it's like, oh, what aspect of your
Mhm.
culture did you decide to make 6 feet tall and hang off your back, sort of thing? um
Yeah.
yeah. So that, yeah, even as a way to express the national sort of thing, and some outfits and clothing become an iconic part of the national character. What would Germany be without lederhosen?
Hmm.
But it's totemic, it's universally recognizable, you know and
I
it's
had
one
a
of those things.
I had a bride who um, was from India and two beautiful dresses, the two piece, the whole beaded everything. And it's one of those ones where you can look at it, both of those dresses, you can look at them and immediately be like, oh, that's from India. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Because
it's
it's so
abs
iconic.
it's some of the stuff is just absolutely totemic. Um, and that is how, that again, it's kind of how in a weird way, clothing, like that's kind of how it goes. And even historically, like if you can even periods of time, certain styles have become totemic. Like if you post up a picture of a woman wearing a tall white powdered wig and a pannier dress with the big hips going out to the side and narrow in the front, you immediately think like 18th century France, because how many period
Hmm.
pieces has that been the style, and that's been the thing, and that's become, again, it's become totemic for that time period, that history, that particular time.
Yeah.
So even if you know
And,
nothing about
and also,
fashion.
I mean, anybody can, if anybody older than 30 can sit there and tell you and be like, "Oh my god, the '90s are back. Oh my god, the '80s are back. Oh, before that, the '70s were back." You know, we all still recognize it of those certain iconic things, and that's just in the last couple generations.
I know. We all recoil in horror at the comeback of Genko jeans.
Yeah, I was not expecting that one, and I'm still recovering.
Yes, agreed. No, that's all of these things have an outsized effect on our lives. And I think a part of that is function as well. Like at the in the bit I was reading for our article about how the casual nature of COVID has changed fashion and style, and has kind of introduced, universal casualness as a thing that we do now, and made society less formal and more comfortable with more comfortable fabrics. History is filled with that. In terms of, a change in climate will necessitate a change in fashion. Um,
Mhm.
and I think, we're already probably starting to see that at some level. But as I mentioned with the mini ice age in the 14th century, European fashion got very heavy and very woolen for a while. And then as things warmed up in the 17th century, things got, lighter and brighter and less wool, more cotton, and also thinner wool pieces because things got warmer. You didn't need all that weight to keep you warm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, another piece of totemic fashion that I also mentioned during that time period was monks' cassock, Catholic monks. That's another one. Nuns and priests, very specific clothing. You can spot them in a crowd
Yep.
immediately.
You know what they look like. Yep.
Yeah. In fact, it's kind of funny because now a lot of orders of nuns don't wear habits anymore. So you kind of can't grab them in a crowd. Whereas like back in the day, you could see a Carmelite nun coming from a mile away. Well,
Oh yeah.
penguins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But now some of the more
Um,
reformed orders aren't doing habits anymore, so they blend into the crowd more.
yeah. Did try and be more relatable because that's the other thing. See, it's about the clothing. It's about the fact of not looking like that nun you had to teach your as when you were in Catholic school when you were 6 and you used to wrap your fingers with a ruler, trying to be more relatable and feel like they can help more and do more things because they don't seem so standoffish because of the strictness of the uniform.
Yeah. And so a change in culture and a need for relatability has changed fashion once again.
Once again.
Once
Well, that was the
again.
other thing I was going to say about one of the when you were reading the thing that you wrote about the change in the Great Depression when everything became a lot more like got rid of the flappers and became a lot more conservative. But I also think a lot of that had to do with prohibition because women who were loose and out there partying were the ones who wore flapper dresses, and us good, pious, not party going women wear our long sleeves, our high necks, all of that stuff because that was to make you look more pious.
Yeah. I mean, yes, but I mean, I think the interesting thing I found about that, not only at that, yes, and waistlines came up because even for the more conservative one, waistlines had gotten down to kind of like below the hip. Waistlines come up.
Mhm.
You had a lot of market dress necks, a lot of boat necks. Those all come in. All sorts of little things. Just we just kind of were like, oh my god, the world is bad. We should cover ourselves.
Cover up. It makes us feel safer. Hold ourselves.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yes. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that. No. That's yes. That is. I mean, but that's another thing where a change in law, in that case, a constitutional amendment,
Mhm.
a change in
Yep.
society was also part of a change in fashion and style. Multiple things were happening, and that
And I
then
mean,
led
you also
to
had on the other side, you had the Dust Bowl, and so people had to cover up because it was
they
very
were getting inundated
uncomfortable
by
to wear
dust.
over the clothes. Right? Exactly. Like they were
Yeah.
being sanded to death. So
Literally.
there were just a lot of things that changed so many things about fashion right around that time period. That time period is a fascinating time period to me just because of how quickly times went from like the 1920s flapper to like the 1950s housewife. Like, that's not a long period of time. And how
No.
many different steps along the way that we took in fashion changing is just, it's fascinating.
Well, yeah, and especially during the war, we had the standard skirt, which only used 2.5 yards of fabric to save on fabric for the war effort. So everyone kind of ended up in this sort of homogenized. My grandmother had a couple that were hers and her mother's from the war, and
I have one or two.
yes, I know. Hers
They're
are
fun.
at my aunt's house in Colorado. And that was something where that design was specifically created by seamstresses hired by the government to come up with ways women could make clothes with the least amount of fabric possible because of
Yep.
rationing.
Yep.
So,
Hmm.
I think World War II is remembered for, planes and atomic bombs and tanks, but even there, fashion was a vital and important part of the war effort in making sure
I
people had
mean,
enough uniforms.
and when we talked about last episode, we talked about the nylon situation, but also World War II was one of the times where it started to really come into fashion for women to wear pants, and that was because they were in jobs where
They were
skirts
welding
were
Liberty ships.
practical.
Yes. Yeah,
They were,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like they were out there doing Rosie Riveter stuff, and so pants became more fashionable and acceptable for women from then on, actually, which never really changed after that.
Yeah, and well, it was and that didn't. I mean, interesting with the 50s and 60s, that kind of fell out a little bit of like women wear pants at home but not in public sort of thing, which you can kind of see on TV sometimes. But then in the 70s, YSL comes in with the women's tuxedo and makes
Oh
and
God.
makes pants specifically for women, all this type of thing. And then you get the ladies' pantsuit,
Mm-hmm.
which also then leads to with the women going into the workforce in the late 70s, early 80s, it also gets you shoulder pads to have broad shoulders like men. And it also gets you specific suits for women in business going to work and being out into the world, which is a contrast to the maybe more delicate fashions of the 2 decades previous. So a social
Well,
change. What's the first thing you need as a woman who's now maybe divorced in the working world? Clothes. Like
mhm.
this is what I can say. Fashion's not just this dumb little thing where we put crazy shit on runways. It affects every little area of our lives because the first thing you need when a social change happens, new clothes.
Yes. Yep.
So
That's
it's
it.
yeah, you end up so you have this interesting thing where you have this sort of weird line from Rosie the Riveter and all those women who are doing jobs because the men were gone in World War II. You then you have a line from that to pantsuits in the 70s to power suits in the 80s. All of these things are tied together because of women's changing roles in society. When women's roles changed, so did the clothing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a continuing thing that's going to happen through history forever.
No, absolutely. And I think there's also, I mean, now we have, things have so changed in so many weird ways because now we have fast fashion, which is incredibly wasteful and crazy and insane. Which and you all which and is all and people the way people are burning through clothes, more quickly than they used
Hmm.
to is very different. Than
I mean, even just the fact that each individual person owns lots of clothing,
yes.
um, comparatively to times in the past where people would only own one or two dresses in their entire life, you know?
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. And so now people, and we also have, some brands like I find this one funny. Gen Z thinks like Champion is the best stuff out there. And I'm like, you mean in the stuff that the poor kids wore in the 90s? Like,
Right?
is
Like,
now like now they're all
oh,
bragging like and like they're wearing the logo proudly. I'm like, when I was growing up, that's what the poor kids who shopped at Kmart wore. Like that was not a prestige
right?
brand. I'm not quite sure who
Yeah.
decided that Champion was the best thing stuff to wear or what marketing decision was behind that. But like in 30 years, we've gone from this is the poor people's brand at Kmart to now we don't have Kmart anymore. And it's now like TikTok influencers and Instagram people
Mhm.
are proudly sporting this logo like, it's some high-minded sort of thing, which I think is just crazy. Like how, how times do change.
Now times do change. Yep. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, like growing up and being like, because we only shopped at thrift stores or Walmart or Kmart and being considered, you know, the poor kid because we weren't going to the nice stores. And now my son and his friends, like, oh, I'm sorry, did you go to a store for that? Or did you just go get that at the Goodwill? Because you get more clout if you got it at the Goodwill. Like it's cooler now to be able to be like, yeah, I got this shirt for
Well, you and I
295.
owned a vintage shop that was basically a nice thrift
Yep.
store for people who didn't want to go to thrift stores. That was our whole
Yep.
business model. Like,
Yeah. We shop for you. It's
yes,
fine.
we'll dig through the racks and find the good stuff. Come to our shop. Like that was our whole business
Yes.
model.
Yep.
But even that, the fact that like, wearing, vintage clothing has suddenly become a fashionable thing that people want to do. Um
Mhm.
is is that's a whole kind of new thing. I mean, I think in the 80s and 90s, if you said, "Hey, do you want to wear some old clothes?" The only kids who were interested were like punk or goth people who thought that was cool and fun. That yes, I know
Yep.
you.
Yep.
Like yeah.
Mhm.
Whereas like now, like what I meanwhile, I stood in our shop and sold someone a Versace suit from the 70s for hundreds of dollars. And he left with a
Mhm.
smile on his face, like he gotten a great deal and was excited to go out and wear it that night. My,
Yes.
how times do change. Like
How
it's
times have changed. Well, and even if you look
yeah,
back at like when our parents were growing up, there is no like when I even in the 90s growing up, like I got half of what I wore from climbing through my parents' closet and finding all the things they forgot from their childhood.
oh yeah,
And loved that because I was a punk. And so all the vintage stuff was all the rave. But if you look at like my parents, even being hippies in the 70s, they would have worn something that my grandmother would have worn around that their age? No, there's no
no,
way. No, we did not
no,
cross. They did not cross generations like that or do vintage like that.
no,
Um, Furniture, sure, not for the clothing.
yeah,
And then now my kid is wearing clothes from me, wearing clothes from my grandfather. I
yeah. Well, I
mean,
mean, but I mean, a foundational part of your business when you started early on was taking old bridal gowns and making them new again. That was a huge part
yeah,
of your business early on, and that's something that pro, it has been a thing as years have gone by because they're expensive and use it again,
yes, you
use it
just
again sort of
pass
thing.
them down through
Right, but
generations.
now, I mean, given that you can get a wedding dress for $1,500, $2,000, cheaper if you go to a
Yeah.
sample sale, all this type of thing. It's amazing that people are like, here is my mom's giant sleeve ball gown from the 80s. Can we bring it into the 21st century? Is remarkable in and of itself.
I mean, and I've had some really fun experiences with redoing ones that were great grandmas and then grandmas and then moms and then they come to me to redo it so that each one of those brides could have an individual experience but all with the same gown, which I think is magical because I like old vintage everything. So, but just bringing that history in is beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're coming to the end of this show. Final thoughts on how fashion affects our lives. Now that we've kind of shown that fashion isn't a trite thing, it has wide ranging implications.
I mean, people even notice when my dog's wearing a cute outfit. Like everybody notices clothes, everybody notices style. So just remember when you're going out into that world, that is who you are representing with your clothing
Absolutely.
choices.
Absolutely. So excellent. Well, so this is episode 2 and part of our 6-part series. So the next one in our series is going to be, and this is going to be fun for you, Brady, the Zen of Bridal is going to be episode 3. So join us next time for episode 3, the Zen of Bridal, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. If you want to comment on any of this in the meantime, please feel free to catch me online at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan. And I'm also on Pinterest, where I posted lots of fashion stuff, including exclusive photos that I've collected over the years, stuff I've collected for books. So go check me out on Pinterest if you want to see all that sort of fun stuff. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.